Well, it's terrible news. There were trumped-up charges, and the trial, as you mentioned, was held in closed session. So there's no transparency, there's no fairness there at all. If there is any silver lining to this, is that the military now will be contemplating what next to do with him. And in previous cases where foreigners have been detained in Myanmar, they have pardoned them and then deported them. So the next steps, I think, for the Australian government will be to try and negotiate the terms or the process by which Sean can be returned to Australia safely and as quickly as possible.
What did you make of these charges in the first place? You talked about the lack of transparency in the court process.
Well, the charges are outrageous. I mean, Sean's work there, and I knew him well. I knew the work that he was doing. Was for the good of the country. He was there as an advisor to Aung San Suu Kyi to help restore that country. It had decades of mismanagement under military rule, and extensive licensing and import regulation procedures, lots of decisions, economic decisions being made on the basis of vested interests and who one knew and contacts and things of that nature. So he was batting back quite a lot of very poor policy proposals which were coming forward for the good of the country, for the good of the people of Myanmar. And there's no doubt that his work it's very transparent, it was very open. He spoke frequently to the business community in Yangon. I attended a number of those sessions explaining his work and the policies of the National League for Democracy government. Bringing business on board with the economic policy settings of the Aung San Suu Kyi's government.
Nicholas Coppel, do you know how Sean Turnell's health is? We know that over the course of the 16-odd months that he's been detained, his health has deteriorated?
I don't have any knowledge on that. One of the problems is he's been held incommunicado. People haven't been able to reach him and to contact him. He's been denied natural justice.
And how is his family back in Australia doing?
Well, as you can imagine, it's an extremely difficult situation. He's in Myanmar, he's being held in prison and without being able to have contact with the family. It's very, very tough for them.
Do you read into anything that he was given a 3-year jail term when it could have been as high as 14 years?
I wouldn't read anything in particular into it. I think what we're going to be hoping for, whatever the length of the term of his sentence, is that he'll get a pardon quickly and be deported from the country and be able to return to his family and to Australia as quickly as possible.
You talked about the Australian government and its next steps in negotiating his safe return. Talk us through that process of what happens now.
Well, it's not automatic, of course, but I think this is a time when it's important for the Australian government to be having contact directly with the military regime. It'll come into some criticism for doing that. There are activist groups who believe that any contact with the military government legitimises them. But so be it. I think our first objective, the guiding principle now, needs to be to get him home as quickly as possible. And I'm sure that's what the instructions to the embassy will be.
What do you make of this government and the previous government's attempts to secure his release?
Well, it's very difficult. The government of Myanmar, not the government, but the military dictatorship in Myanmar has proven itself to be fairly insensitive to international pressure and international representations. That's its characteristic. It's have a long history of governing without any due regard to the wishes of the people of Myanmar, let alone the wishes of the rest of the world. So representations are necessary, but they're also very difficult to achieve outcomes in that context. It's a very inward-looking regime. It's one which is very isolated even within the context of Myanmar. They have their own education system, they have their own health system, they have their own communities in which they live. It's very much a closed world, and to influence it, particularly at the senior levels, is particularly difficult. And they often don't think in the ways, in rational ways, the way we would expect them to. And they certainly don't respond well to pressure. They've had a long history of being fairly impervious to international sanctions. So it's a difficult challenge, but nevertheless, it's important for our views, Australia's views, to be communicated to the regime that we would expect Sean to be returned to Australia as quickly as possible.